The rain hammered against Lincoln High's windows like bullets, each drop exploding into 1,000 fragments before sliding down the glass. I should have left hours ago, but the stack of ungraded art projects on my desk seemed to mock me every time I glanced at the clock. 26 years old, and I was spending another Friday night alone in an empty school building, surrounded by watercolor disasters and charcoal smudges that barely resembled the Renaissance masterpieces I'd assigned. The fluorescent lights above flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows across the classroom walls, where my students' work hung in neat rows. Monet's lilies reimagined by hormonal teenagers. Picasso's cubism filtered through the lens of social media addiction. At least they tried, which was more than I could say for the school board's effort to keep this place funded. I gathered the last of the projects, shoving them into my worn leather bag. The sound echoed unnaturally in the silence. Empty schools had a particular kind of quietness that seemed to press against your eardrums, making every small noise feel amplified and somehow threatening. My heels clicked against the polished linoleum as I made my way toward the exit, past rows of battered lockers and bulletin boards announcing homecoming dates that had already passed. The main hallway stretched before me like a tunnel, lit only by the emergency lighting that cast everything in an amber glow. I was fumbling with my keys at the front door when I heard it. A sharp crack, like a branch snapping. Then another, and another. Gunshots. My blood turned to ice. The sounds were coming from the parking lot, muffled by the storm, but unmistakable. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, heart hammering so hard I was certain it would give me away to whatever was happening outside. Through the narrow window, I could see the shadows of several figures moving between the cars. The rain made everything blurry, but I could make out the outline of expensive vehicles, sleek and dark like predators waiting in the night. Another shot. A body fell. I bit down on my knuckle to keep from crying out, tasting blood. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not at my school, not on a random Friday night when I should have been home grading papers and eating leftover Chinese food. The figures moved with purpose now, dragging something heavy toward one of the cars. I caught a glimpse of a face in the brief illumination of a cell phone screen. Sharp cheekbones, cold eyes, an expression of complete indifference as he wiped his hands on what looked like an expensive handkerchief. I needed to run. Every instinct screamed at me to get away, to find somewhere safe, to call the police. But my legs felt like they were made of concrete, and my hands shook so violently that I dropped my keys. They hit the floor with a metallic clatter that seemed to echo through the entire building. The sound stopped everything. The figures outside went still, and I watched in horror as that same face turned toward the school building. Even through the rain and darkness, I could feel his gaze searching, hunting. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the single, terrifying realization that I had just witnessed a murder. And now the killer knew someone was watching. My phone. I needed to call 911, needed to get help, needed to do something other than stand there like a deer caught in headlights. But when I reached for it, my purse slipped from my shoulder, contents spilling across the floor with a sound like thunder in the silence. That was when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving closer to the building. I ran. My heels slipped on the polished floor as I sprinted down the hallway, past the empty classrooms and darkened offices. I needed somewhere to hide, somewhere they couldn't find me. The bathroom. The women's bathroom at the far end of the building. It had a lock, and maybe they wouldn't think to look there. I burst through the door and immediately turned the deadbolt, pressing my back against the cold metal as I tried to catch my breath. The bathroom was small, with just 3 stalls and a row of sinks beneath a cracked mirror. Harsh fluorescent lighting made everything look sickly and pale. I could hear them now, moving through the building, doors opening and closing. Footsteps echoing off the walls. They were searching methodically, room by room. I slipped into the last stall and locked it behind me, climbing up onto the toilet seat so my feet wouldn't be visible. My phone showed no signal. Of course, the school was old, built like a fortress, and cell service had always been spotty. The bathroom door handle turned. My heart stopped. The deadbolt would hold, wouldn't it? It had to. I pressed my hand over my mouth to muffle my breathing, listening as someone tested the door more forcefully. Then silence. I waited, counting the seconds. praying they had moved on. 1 minute, 2, 3, the lights went out. In the absolute darkness, I heard the soft click of the lock being picked. Professional, efficient, terrifying. The door opened with barely a whisper of sound. "I know you're here." The voice was low, controlled, with the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't place. Italian, maybe. "You saw something you shouldn't have seen." I held my breath, pressing myself against the stall wall as if I could somehow disappear into it. "I'm not going to hurt you," he continued, his footsteps moving slowly across the tile floor. "But we need to talk. About what you witnessed. About what happens now." He was close. So close I could hear the soft rustle of expensive fabric as he moved. "You can come out now or I can come find you. Your choice." The silence stretched between us like a razor wire. I could feel his presence in the darkness, patient and immovable. This wasn't someone who made idle threats. Slowly, on trembling legs, I unlocked the stall door and stepped out into the black void of the bathroom. A beam of light hit my face, blinding me momentarily. When my eyes adjusted, I found myself staring at a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a Renaissance painting. Dark hair perfectly styled despite the rain, sharp features carved from marble, and eyes the color of winter ice that seemed to see straight through me. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Deadly and compelling and absolutely terrifying. "Valentina Costa," he said, and my blood turned to ice water. He knew my name. 26 years old. Art teacher. Lives alone in apartment 3B on Maple Street. Parents died in a car accident 8 years ago. Left you with $30,000 in debt that you're still paying off. How do you... I make it my business to know these things. He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something metallic. Blood. "The question is, Miss Costa, what am I going to do with you now?" I couldn't speak. Couldn't think. Could barely stand. "You saw something tonight. Something that could be problematic for me and my associates. That puts us both in a rather difficult position." "I won't tell anyone," I whispered. "I swear. I won't say anything to anyone." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips, but it didn't reach those ice-blue eyes. "I'm sure you believe that, but fear makes people do unpredictable things, and I've built my life on being able to predict exactly what people will do." He reached into his coat, and I flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a phone and made a quick call in rapid Italian. When he hung up, he looked at me with something that might have been pity. "My name is Lorenzo Santangelo," he said, "and I'm afraid your quiet little life just came to an end." The drive through the rain-soaked streets felt like a descent into hell. I sat rigid in the back seat of Lorenzo's black sedan, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had gone white. The leather seats smelled of expensive cologne and something darker. Danger, perhaps, or death. I couldn't tell which. Lorenzo sat across from me, his ice-blue eyes never leaving my face as he spoke quietly into his phone in rapid Italian. Every few seconds, those predatory eyes would flick over me, cataloging my fear, my confusion, my growing desperation. He was assessing me like a piece of property he'd just acquired. The city blurred past the tinted windows. Familiar neighborhoods giving way to areas I'd never seen before. Wealthier areas. Areas where people like me didn't belong. "Where are you taking me?" My voice came out smaller than I'd intended, barely audible over the purr of the engine. Lorenzo ended his call and slipped the phone into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket. "Somewhere safe." "Safe?" I let out a hysterical laugh. "You just killed someone. You kidnapped me from my school. How was any of this safe?" Something flickered in those cold eyes. Amusement, maybe? Or annoyance. "I saved your life, Miss Costa. The man I killed tonight was there to eliminate a witness. A witness who saw too much 3 weeks ago when the Petrov family decided to expand their operations into my territory. I don't understand." "You will." The car turned through massive iron gates that opened soundlessly as we approached. Beyond them stretched a driveway lined with towering oak trees, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out what little moonlight managed to penetrate the storm clouds. At the end of the drive sat a mansion that looked like something from a Gothic novel. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. 3 stories of pale stone and dark windows, with architectural details that spoke of old money and older power. Light spilled from several windows, casting golden rectangles onto the manicured lawns, but most of the house remained shrouded in shadow. "Welcome to my home," Lorenzo said as the car came to a stop beneath a covered portico. Before I could respond, my door was opened by a man in an expensive suit, who nodded respectfully to Lorenzo. Another suited figure appeared at Lorenzo's door, and I realized with a chill that we were surrounded. Men moved through the shadows of the estate like phantoms, all of them armed, all of them watching me. "How many people work for you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Enough." Lorenzo stepped out of the car and extended his hand to me. When I hesitated, his expression hardened. "I'm not going to ask again, Valentina." The way he said my name sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. Not threatening exactly, but absolute. Like he owned it now. Like he owned me. I took his hand, hating the way my skin tingled at the contact. His fingers were warm and calloused, surprisingly gentle as they closed around mine. He helped me from the car with the practiced courtesy of a man who had been raised with old-world manners, even as everything about him screamed danger. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than the exterior. We entered through massive double doors into a foyer that could have housed my entire apartment. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and oil paintings that looked like museum pieces lined the walls. A sweeping staircase curved up to the second floor, its banister carved from what looked like ebony. "This way," Lorenzo said, his hand still on the small of my back as he guided me deeper into the house. We passed through rooms that grew progressively more intimate. A formal living room with furniture that probably cost more than I made in a year. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the lingering scent of aged paper and leather. Finally, we reached what appeared to be his private study. The room was decidedly masculine, with dark wood paneling and leather furniture arranged around a massive fireplace. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Behind an enormous desk sat rows of filing cabinets, and I caught a glimpse of multiple computer monitors displaying what looked like security feeds. "Sit," Lorenzo commanded, gesturing to one of 2 leather chairs positioned in front of the fireplace. I remained standing. "I want to go home." "That's not possible." "Why not?" "I told you I won't say anything about what I saw. I swear to you." "Your word means nothing." He moved behind his desk and withdrew a thick manila folder, which he tossed onto the coffee table between us. "Your name is Valentina Elena Costa. You're 26 years old. Born in Chicago but moved to New York when you were 18 to attend art school. Your parents died in a car accident 8 years ago, leaving you with significant debt from your father's medical treatments." My blood turned to ice. "How do you know all that? You live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on Maple Street that you can barely afford. You teach art at Lincoln High School for $38,000 a year, which isn't enough to cover your living expenses, let alone pay down your student loans and your father's medical debt. You have $17,000 in credit card debt. Your car is 12 years old and needs a new transmission, and you've been eating ramen noodles for dinner 4 nights a week for the past 6 months." Each word was like a physical blow. My entire pathetic life laid bare by this man who looked like a prince and spoke like the devil himself. You have no close friends, no romantic relationships, and the only family you have left is an elderly aunt in Florida who has dementia and doesn't remember your name. His voice was clinical, detached, as if he were reading a grocery list rather than dissecting my existence. "You're completely, utterly alone in the world, Valentina, which makes you perfect for what I need." "What you need?" I sank into the chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Lorenzo moved around the desk with predatory grace, settling into the chair across from me. The firelight played across his sharp features, making him look like something carved from marble and shadow. 3 weeks ago, you witnessed the assassination of Vincent Torino, a member of my organization who had been feeding information to the Russian Bratva. Tonight, you witnessed me eliminating the man the Russians sent to silence you permanently. I don't understand. How did they even know I existed? Because Vincent told them about you before he died. Told them about the pretty teacher who saw him pass documents to Dmitry Petrov in the parking lot of your school. The room spun around me. That's impossible. I never saw anything like that. I would have remembered. You were leaving school late that night, too. You walked past Vincent's car just as he was handing over a flash drive containing information about my shipping operations. You probably didn't think anything of it at the time, but Vincent was paranoid. He was convinced you'd seen enough to identify him later. I tried to remember that night 3 weeks ago, but it was just another evening of staying late to grade papers. Had I seen something? Someone? Even if that's true, why does it matter now? Vincent is dead. I couldn't identify him to anyone. Lorenzo leaned forward, his ice-blue eyes boring into mine. Because the Russians don't take chances. They've decided you're a liability, and they won't stop hunting you until you're dead. The weight of his words settled over me like a shroud. So what happens now? A smile played at the corners of his mouth, but it was cold, calculating. Now, Valentina Costa, you disappear. Your old life ends tonight. You can't just make me disappear. People will notice I'm gone. My students, my principal. Your principal received a call an hour ago informing him that you've suffered a family emergency and will be taking an indefinite leave of absence. Your landlord has been paid 3 months' rent in advance and told you've moved out of state to care for a sick relative. Your car has been moved from the school parking lot. I stared at him in horror. In the span of a few hours, he had erased my entire existence with the efficiency of a man who had done this before. The woman who was Valentina Costa no longer exists, he continued. But I'm offering you something better. Something more. What? He stood and moved to a sideboard, pouring amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 glasses. He offered one to me, but I shook my head. Protection, security, a life without fear or want. He took a sip of what I assumed was extremely expensive whiskey, in exchange for one thing. What? Your complete obedience. The word hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could see it in his eyes, the absolute certainty that I would comply, that I had no other choice. He was probably right. I won't be your prisoner. You won't be my prisoner, he agreed. You'll be my wife. The word wife hung in the air between us like a death sentence. I stared at Lorenzo Santangelo, searching his ice-blue eyes for any sign that this was some kind of twisted joke. But there was nothing except cold calculation and absolute certainty. That's insane, I whispered. You can't just decide to marry someone you met an hour ago. I can do whatever I want, Valentina. That's what power means. I stood abruptly, the leather chair scraping against the hardwood floor. No, I won't do it. You can't make me. Lorenzo remained seated, completely unfazed by my outburst. He took another sip of his whiskey, studying me over the rim of the crystal glass like I was a painting he was considering purchasing. Sit down. I said no. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Lorenzo finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Sit. Down. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But where could I go? I was trapped in a mansion surrounded by armed men, miles from anywhere I knew. Slowly, reluctantly, I sank back into the chair. Better. He set down his glass and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Let me explain something to you, cara mia. The Petrov family doesn't negotiate. They don't show mercy. They don't leave loose ends. Right now, you are the loosest of loose ends. But I told you, what you told me is irrelevant. They've already decided you're a threat. The only way to keep you alive is to make you untouchable. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the fire crackling in the hearth. And marrying you makes me untouchable? Marriage to me makes you family. And in this world, familia is sacred. Even the Russians wouldn't dare touch the wife of Lorenzo Santangelo. The way he said his own name sent another shiver down my spine, like it was a weapon in itself. This marriage means nothing, he continued, his voice matter-of-fact. A piece of paper. A legal shield. Nothing more. Then why marriage? Why not just, I don't know, put me in witness protection or something? Lorenzo laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Witness protection? You think the federal government can keep you safe from the Bratva? They have people everywhere, Valentina. Police, judges, federal agents. The only protection that means anything in this world is the kind that comes with consequences. I thought about my small apartment, my students, My simple life that had been turned upside down in the span of a few hours. What if I refuse? Then you die. Tonight, tomorrow, next week. It doesn't matter when. The result will be the same. The casual way he said it, like he was discussing the weather, made my stomach turn. You're asking me to give up everything. I'm asking you to live. A soft knock interrupted us. Lorenzo called out in Italian, and the door opened to admit a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone accustomed to serving powerful men. Maria. Lorenzo stood and switched to English. This is Valentina Costa, my future wife. She'll be staying in the Rose Suite tonight. Future wife. The words hit me like physical blows. Maria's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something in her dark eyes. Sympathy, maybe. Or pity. Of course, Mr. Santangelo. Shall I prepare something for Miss Costa to eat? Yes. And have Sophia bring up some appropriate clothing for tomorrow. His gaze swept over my simple teacher's outfit with obvious distaste. We have a wedding to plan. Wedding? I shot to my feet again. Wait just a minute. I haven't agreed to anything. Lorenzo's attention returned to me, and suddenly the air in the room felt thin and dangerous. Haven't you? No, I haven't. I lifted my chin, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. I need time to think about this. Time is a luxury you don't have. 1 night. Give me 1 night to process this insanity. For a long moment, he simply stared at me. Then incredibly, his lips curved into something that might have been amusement. You have spirit. I like that. Is that a yes? 1 night, he agreed. But understand this, Valentina. Tomorrow morning you will walk down the aisle and become my wife, or you will die. Those are your only options. Maria cleared her throat delicately. Miss Costa, if you would follow me. I looked back at Lorenzo one more time, memorizing every detail of his sharp features and cold eyes. Tomorrow, this man would become my husband. The thought made me dizzy. One more thing, he called as I reached the door. Don't even think about trying to leave. My men have orders to stop you by whatever means necessary. The Rose Suite was located on the 2nd floor of the mansion, down a hallway lined with oil paintings that probably cost more than most people's houses. Maria opened a door to reveal a room that looked like something from a fairy tale. The walls were painted a soft blush pink, and an enormous 4-poster bed dominated the space, draped with silk curtains and piled high with pillows. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the estate's gardens, and a marble fireplace crackled with warmth. The bathroom is through there, Maria said, indicating another door. I'll have Sophia bring up some clothes shortly. Is there anything specific you need? I wanted to laugh. What I needed was to wake up from this nightmare. What I needed was my old life back. What I needed was for this to all be some terrible mistake. No, I said instead. Thank you. After Maria left, I wandered around the opulent room, touching expensive fabrics and admiring artwork that belonged in museums. It was beautiful and luxurious, and felt like the most elegant prison cell in the world. I tried the French doors, but they were locked. The windows didn't open. Even the telephone on the nightstand was dead when I picked up the receiver. A soft knock made me jump. A young woman entered carrying an armload of clothing and boxes. Hello, Miss Costa. I'm Sophia. She had the same dark eyes as Maria, but looked to be in her 20s. I brought some things for you to try on. She laid out dress after dress on the bed. Silk, cashmere, designer labels I recognized from magazines. In the boxes were shoes, lingerie, jewelry, everything a soon-to-be Mafia wife might need. How did you know my size? I asked. Sophia smiled. Mr. Santangelo is very thorough. Of course he was. The man had probably known my measurements before I even knew I existed. After Sophia left, I ran a bath in the marble tub, sinking into water that smelled of expensive oils, and trying not to think about tomorrow. But my mind wouldn't stop racing. Lorenzo Santangelo. I rolled the name around in my mouth, testing its weight. 32 years old, according to what I'd overheard during his phone conversations. Handsome in a way that made my breath catch, despite everything. Dangerous in a way that should have terrified me completely. Instead, I found myself remembering the way his eyes had sparked with amusement when I'd stood up to him, the way his voice had gentled slightly when he'd called me Cara Mia, the careful way he'd helped me from the car, like I was made of something precious. "This marriage means nothing," he'd said, but something in his expression had suggested otherwise. I stayed in the bath until the water grew cold, then wrapped myself in a silk robe and sat by the window, staring out at the grounds. Men in dark suits patrolled the perimeter, their presence a constant reminder that I was trapped. But was I really? The honest answer was that I'd been trapped long before tonight. Trapped by debt, by loneliness, by a life that felt like it was slowly suffocating me. At least this cage was beautiful. At least Lorenzo Santangelo looked at me like I was more than just a forgettable teacher living paycheck to paycheck. The thought was dangerous, I knew. This man was a killer, a criminal, someone who lived in a world I couldn't even comprehend. But when he'd said my name, when he'd studied me with those ice-blue eyes, I'd felt more alive than I had in years. Tomorrow, I would become Valentina Santangelo. The thought should have horrified me. Instead, as I drifted off to sleep in the enormous bed, I found myself wondering what it would be like to belong to someone as powerful and compelling as Lorenzo, what it would be like to matter to someone like him, what it would be like to be his wife, even if the marriage meant nothing. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I suspected it would mean everything. The morning light filtered through the silk curtains, casting everything in a golden hue that should have been beautiful, but felt ominous instead. I woke with the disorienting sensation of not knowing where I was, then remembered with a jolt that today was my wedding day. My wedding to a man I'd met less than 24 hours ago. A man who killed people for a living. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. Sophia entered carrying a breakfast tray, and what looked like garment bags draped over her arm. "Good morning, Mrs. Santangelo," she said with a small smile. Mrs. Santangelo. The name sent a chill through me. "I'm not married yet. You will be in 3 hours. 3 hours." My stomach lurched. Sophia set the tray on the small table by the window and hung the garment bags in the walk-in closet. "Mr. Santangelo asked me to tell you that the ceremony will be small and private. Just family and close associates. How many people? Perhaps 20. 20 strangers watching me pledge my life to Lorenzo." The thought made my hands shake as I reached for the coffee. "What about my family?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Sophia's expression softened. "I'm sorry, Miss Costa. Mr. Santangelo said there wasn't time to arrange for guests from your side." Of course there wasn't, because I didn't really have anyone left to invite anyway. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was about to get married with no one there who actually cared about me. After Sophia left, I picked at the breakfast and tried to calm my racing heart. Through the window, I could see men setting up chairs in what appeared to be a garden behind the house. White roses and baby's breath adorned an archway that looked like something from a fairy tale. If I'd designed my own wedding, it might have looked exactly like this. The thought was dangerous, so I pushed it away. At exactly 10 o'clock, Maria knocked and entered with 2 other women I hadn't met before. One carried a professional makeup kit, the other what looked like hairstyling tools. "Time to get ready," Maria announced. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparation. My hair was styled into an elegant updo with soft curls framing my face. My makeup was applied with the skill of a professional artist, subtle but flawless. When they were finished, I barely recognized myself in the mirror. "Now for the dress," Maria said. She unzipped one of the garment bags to reveal a gown that took my breath away. It was ivory silk, simple yet elegant, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that would fall just to my ankles. The neckline was modest, but somehow still managed to be sensual, and delicate lace sleeves completed the look. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "Mr. Santangelo selected it personally," Maria said as she helped me step into the dress. "He has excellent taste." The dress fit perfectly, as if it had been made for me. Which, knowing Lorenzo's thoroughness, it probably had been. As Maria fastened the tiny buttons up the back, I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror. I looked like a bride, a real bride, glowing and beautiful, and ready to marry the man she loved. The illusion was so perfect, it made my chest ache. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. "Come in," Maria called. The door opened, and Lorenzo stepped inside. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored black tuxedo that made him look like a prince from a dark fairy tale. His ice blue eyes swept over me, and for a moment, something flickered in their depths. "Beautiful," he said simply. The single word sent heat rushing through me. No one had ever looked at me the way Lorenzo was looking at me right now, like I was something precious and perfect, and entirely his. "Leave us," he said to the women, his gaze never leaving mine. When we were alone, he stepped closer. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "These were my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a pair of pearl earrings surrounded by diamonds. "She died when I was 16. The admission was unexpected, revealing a crack in his carefully controlled facade. I found myself wondering what she'd been like, this woman who'd raised a son who could be both brutal killer and tender groom. "They're beautiful," I said. He moved behind me to fasten them, his fingers brushing against my neck as he worked. The contact sent shivers down my spine. "There's something else." From another pocket, he produced a pistol. Small, silver, elegant in its deadliness. "This is for you." I stared at the weapon in horror. "I can't. I don't know how to use that." "You'll learn. From this moment on, you'll never be without protection." He slipped the gun into a hidden pocket in my dress that I hadn't even noticed was there. "The Petrovs are not known for their honor. Being my wife makes you a target as much as it makes you untouchable." The weight of the pistol against my hip was a constant reminder of the dangerous world I was entering. "Lorenzo, it's time," he said, offering me his arm. We walked through the mansion's corridors in silence, my heels clicking against marble floors, the train of my dress whispering behind me. Through tall windows, I could see the guests assembled in the garden, men in expensive suits with faces that looked carved from stone, and a few women who watched our approach with undisguised curiosity. The officiant was waiting beneath the rose-covered archway, an elderly man with kind eyes who looked completely out of place among the gathered criminals. When he smiled at me, I felt some of my terror ease slightly. Lorenzo and I took our positions, and the ceremony began. The words washed over me like a tide. Love, honor, cherish, till death do us part. Promises I'd dreamed of making to someone who truly loved me, now being spoken to a man who'd made it clear this marriage meant nothing. But when Lorenzo slipped the ring onto my finger, a stunning diamond that caught the afternoon light and threw rainbows across my dress, his touch was surprisingly gentle. And when his ice blue eyes met mine as he spoke his vows, there was something in them that looked almost like tenderness. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant announced. Lorenzo's hands came up to frame my face, his thumbs brushing across my cheekbones with infinite care. For a moment, we just looked at each other, and I could see a question in his eyes. Then his lips touched mine. The kiss was soft, almost hesitant, as if he was giving me the choice to pull away. But instead of recoiling, I found myself leaning into him, my hands coming up to rest against his chest. His heart was beating as rapidly as mine. When we broke apart, his forehead rested against mine for just a moment. "Mrs. Santangelo," he whispered, so quietly that only I could hear. The sound of applause broke the spell, reminding me that we had an audience. I turned to face our guests, Lorenzo's arm around my waist, and tried to smile like a happy bride. But as I looked out at the faces of the men who worked for my new husband, men who killed and stole and worse for his approval, I realized with crystal clarity that my old life hadn't just ended last night in that school bathroom. It had ended the moment I'd said "I do" to Lorenzo Santangelo. Now I belonged to him, and he belonged to a world where violence was currency and loyalty was bought with blood. The question was, what kind of woman would I become in order to survive it? 3 weeks into our honeymoon in the Amalfi Coast, I finally understood what Lorenzo meant when he said this marriage was just business. We occupied the same villa, shared meals on the terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, even slept in the same enormous bed. But he treated me like an expensive piece of art he'd acquired, beautiful to look at, carefully protected, but never truly touched. The villa was a masterpiece of Italian architecture, perched on cliffs that dropped dramatically into azure waters. Every morning, I woke to Lorenzo already gone, conducting business calls in his study, or meeting with men who arrived in sleek boats and spoke in hushed, urgent Italian. Every evening, he returned to find me reading on the terrace or painting watercolors of the coastline, and we'd share dinner in polite, distant conversation. "You're an excellent cook," I said one evening, watching him prepare fresh pasta with the skill of someone who'd been doing it his entire life. His movements were precise, almost meditative, as he worked the dough with strong hands that I'd seen hold both guns and delicate flowers with equal care. My mother taught me before she died. His hands moved efficiently, rolling the dough with practiced ease. She said a man who couldn't feed himself was destined to starve or marry badly. It was one of the few personal details he'd shared, and I treasured it like a secret. "What was she like?" I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter as I watched him work. The late afternoon sun streaming through the windows caught the gold in his dark hair, and I found myself memorizing the sight. Lorenzo's hands stilled for just a moment. Strong, beautiful. She loved my father with a devotion that bordered on obsession. It killed her in the end. "What do you mean?" "She couldn't live without him after he was murdered. She took her own life 3 months later." His voice was matter of fact, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. The raw pain in his voice made my chest ache. Without thinking, I reached out to touch his hand, but he pulled away before our skin could make contact. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't be. It taught me a valuable lesson about the dangers of emotional attachment." The message was clear. Don't get too close. Don't expect too much. Don't mistake this arrangement for something real. But late at night, when he thought I was sleeping, I'd feel the mattress dip as he sat on the edge of the bed, his presence a warm weight in the darkness. Sometimes his fingers would almost brush my hair before he'd catch himself and pull away. Sometimes I'd hear him whisper my name like a prayer he wasn't allowed to say. Those moments gave me dangerous hope. During the days, I explored the villa and its grounds like a beautiful prisoner. The staff was kind but distant, speaking to me with the careful respect reserved for the boss's wife. I painted the sweeping views of the coastline, read books from Lorenzo's extensive library, and tried not to think about the fact that I was completely cut off from everything I'd ever known. The isolation should have driven me mad. Instead, I found myself studying Lorenzo, like he was one of the Renaissance masters I'd taught my students about. Every gesture, every expression, every carefully controlled word fascinated me. He was a man built of contradictions, capable of breathtaking violence and unexpected tenderness, ruthless in business, but gentle when he thought no one was watching. I began to understand that the distance he maintained wasn't just about emotional protection. It was about control. Lorenzo Santangelo controlled everything in his world with military precision, and that included his own feelings. But I was starting to suspect that his feelings for me were becoming increasingly difficult to control. On our 21st day in Italy, everything changed. I was painting on the terrace when I heard the sound of multiple boats approaching at high speed. The mechanical roar of powerful engines cut through the peaceful afternoon like a knife. Lorenzo emerged from his study, tension radiating from every line of his body. He spoke rapid Italian into his phone while scanning the horizon with military precision. "Get inside," he commanded, his voice carrying an authority I'd never heard before. "Now." "What's happening?" "The Petrovs. They've found us." Terror flooded my system. I'd almost forgotten about the Russians in the idyllic bubble of our honeymoon. Almost forgotten that we were being hunted by people who wanted me dead for something I'd witnessed weeks ago in a school parking lot. Lorenzo grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the villa's interior. His grip was firm but careful, mindful of my strength even in his urgency. "There's a safe room behind the wine cellar. I need you to—" The first gunshot shattered the afternoon calm. Lorenzo shoved me to the ground as bullets sprayed across the terrace, destroying my easel and sending chunks of stone flying through the air like deadly confetti. My painting of the Mediterranean sunset dissolved into ribbons under the assault. The peaceful villa transformed into a war zone in seconds. "Stay low," Lorenzo shouted over the chaos. He'd drawn a gun from somewhere, his entire demeanor shifting from distant husband to lethal predator. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. "Can you make it to the stairs?" More gunshots erupted from multiple directions. They weren't just attacking from the water. They'd surrounded us on land, too. Through the chaos, I could hear men shouting in Russian, their voices harsh and urgent. "Lorenzo!" I screamed as a bullet came so close to his head that it singed his perfectly styled hair. His ice-blue eyes met mine across the terrace, and for the first time since our wedding, I saw real emotion there. Fear. Not for himself, but for me. "Go!" he roared. "Get to the safe room." But I couldn't move. Couldn't think. Couldn't process that this beautiful place where we'd been playing house had become a battlefield where people were trying to kill us. That's when I saw the boat speeding directly toward our private dock. In it sat a man with pale eyes and stark Slavic features. Dmitri Petrov, I realized with bone-deep certainty. The Russian who wanted me dead. Even from a distance, I could see the cold satisfaction on his face as he surveyed the chaos his men had created. Lorenzo followed my gaze, and his face went completely still. "Merda," he breathed, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern that chilled me more than the gunfire. He spoke rapidly into his phone, but I could tell from his expression that help was too far away. We were on our own against however many men Petrov had brought with him. "Valentina, listen to me." He crawled across the stone floor to where I lay frozen. Blood was seeping through his white shirt from a graze on his arm, but he ignored it completely. "In about 60 seconds, Dmitri Petrov is going to walk through that door. When he does, I need you to run. Don't look back. Don't try to help me. Just run to the safe room and lock yourself inside. I'm not leaving you. You are. Because if he gets his hands on you, he'll use you to destroy me, and then he'll kill us both anyway." The sound of footsteps in the villa made us both freeze. Heavy boots on marble floors, multiple sets, moving with military precision. They were inside. Lorenzo pressed something cold and heavy into my hands. A gun. The one he'd given me on our wedding day that I'd never thought I'd actually need to use. "Remember what I taught you," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "Safety off, aim for the center of mass, squeeze, don't pull the trigger. And Valentina," his voice caught slightly, "whatever happens, know that you gave me something I never thought I could have." "What?" "Hope." The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by harsh Russian voices. Lorenzo kissed me then, hard and desperate and full of all the emotion he'd been holding back for weeks. When he pulled away, his eyes were fierce with something that looked remarkably like love. "I should have told you," he said. "This marriage, it stopped being business the moment I put that ring on your finger." Then he was gone, moving with lethal grace toward the villa's interior, drawing the attackers away from me with his own body as bait. I heard shouting in Russian and Italian, then gunfire. So much gunfire that the walls seemed to shake with it. But I didn't run to the safe room like he'd commanded. Instead, I found myself moving toward the sound of battle, the gun steady in my hands, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and something else. Something fierce and protective and absolutely certain. Lorenzo Santangelo was my husband. He might have married me for business. But somewhere along the way, I'd fallen in love with him, and I'd be damned if I was going to hide in a closet while he fought for our lives alone. The thought should have horrified me, that I was willing to kill for him, willing to die for him. But instead, it felt like the truest thing I'd ever known. When I reached the villa's main room, I saw Lorenzo backed against the wall, bleeding from wounds in his shoulder and thigh, facing 3 armed Russians. Dmitri Petrov stood in the center, his pale eyes filled with cold satisfaction as he surveyed his cornered prey. "The famous Lorenzo Santangelo," Dmitri said in accented English. "Not so powerful now, are you? Where's your pretty little wife?" "Go to hell," Lorenzo snarled, though I could see the exhaustion in his posture, the way he favored his injured leg. Dmitri smiled, an expression devoid of warmth or humanity. "I think I'll find her myself. After I finish with you, I have such plans for the little teacher who thought she could witness my business and live to tell about it." That's when I stepped out of the shadows, gun raised, hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "You found me," I said. All 4 men turned in shock, but I kept my weapon trained on Dmitri, remembering everything Lorenzo had taught me during our quiet evenings on the terrace. "Mrs. Santangelo," Dmitri said, his smile widening into something predatory. "How thoughtful of you to join us. Though I must say, you're not quite what I expected from a Mafia wife." "Let him go." Dmitri laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think you can threaten me, little teacher? You don't have the stomach for this world. You don't have what it takes to pull that trigger." "You're right," I said calmly, my voice steadier than I felt. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't have hurt anyone. I spent my whole life avoiding conflict, trying to help people instead of hurting them. But you made one mistake, Dmitri. "And what's that?" I thought about Lorenzo's gentle hands teaching me to cook, his quiet presence in the darkness, the way he'd kissed me like I was precious and fragile and worth dying for. "You threatened my husband." I squeezed the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the villa like thunder, and Dmitri Petrov stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder where my bullet had found its mark. Blood seeped between his fingers as he stared at me in shock, his pale eyes wide with disbelief. "You shot me," he said, as if he couldn't quite process what had happened. "I warned you," I replied, keeping the gun trained on him even as my hands shook with adrenaline. "I told you to let him go." The other 2 Russians raised their weapons toward me, but Lorenzo moved with lightning speed despite his injuries. In one fluid motion, he disarmed the nearest man and put a bullet in the second before they could fire. The sound of gunshots filled the air again, mixing with Dmitri's pained curses in Russian. "Valentina, get down!" Lorenzo shouted as more men poured into the villa from outside. I dropped behind an overturned marble table just as automatic gunfire sprayed across the room. Chunks of priceless art and centuries-old furniture exploded around us. Through the chaos, I could see Lorenzo moving like a man possessed, taking cover behind a stone pillar as he returned fire with deadly precision. "How many more are there?" I called out to him. "Too many," he replied grimly, "but I called for backup before they breached the perimeter. My men should be here soon." "Should be? Pray they are." Dmitri was still standing, though he swayed from blood loss. He barked orders in Russian to his men, and I watched in horror as 3 more armed figures appeared at the villa's entrance. We were outnumbered at least 6-1. "Lorenzo Sant'Angelo," Dmitri called out, his accented voice carrying despite the gunfire. "You've caused me considerable trouble, but I'm prepared to be reasonable. Give me the woman, and I'll kill you quickly." "Counter offer," Lorenzo replied, his voice deadly calm. "Surrender now, and I'll only break half the bones in your body before I put a bullet in your head." Dmitri laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Still so arrogant, even when you're bleeding to death. I looked at Lorenzo and saw that Dmitri was right. The wounds he'd sustained were worse than I'd realized. His shirt was soaked with blood, and I could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes, though his hands remained steady as he continued to return fire. "Valentina," he said quietly, reloading his weapon with practiced efficiency. "There's something I need you to know." "What?" "The safe room has a direct line to my security team. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. If something happens," he continued firmly, "get to that room and tell them Code Omega. They'll know what to do." "What's Code Omega?" Lorenzo's ice-blue eyes met mine across the chaos. "Nuclear option. It means eliminate everyone who isn't family." The weight of his words settled over me. He was preparing for the possibility that we might not both survive this, that he might not survive this. "I love you," I said suddenly, the words torn from my chest like a physical thing. For a moment, everything else faded away. The gunfire, the danger, the blood, none of it mattered. There was only Lorenzo's face, his eyes widening with something that looked like wonder. "Cosa hai detto?" he whispered. "What did you say?" "I said I love you, Lorenzo Sant'Angelo. This marriage stopped being business for me the moment you kissed me at the altar." A smile transformed his face, making him look younger, softer, like the man he might have been in a different life. "Ti amo anch'io, cara mia. I love you too." The sound of helicopters approaching interrupted the moment. Through the villa's shattered windows, I could see black aircraft descending toward the estate, and my heart leaped with hope. "Cavalry's here," Lorenzo said with grim satisfaction. But Dmitri wasn't finished. With a roar of rage, he lunged from his cover, gun raised not at Lorenzo but at me. Time seemed to slow as I saw his finger tighten on the trigger, saw the hatred burning in his pale eyes. Lorenzo moved without hesitation, throwing himself between us just as Dimitri fired. The bullet meant for me caught Lorenzo in the chest, and he went down hard. "No!" I screamed, abandoning my cover to reach him. I dropped to my knees beside him, pressing my hands against the wound as blood poured between my fingers. "Lorenzo, stay with me. Please, stay with me." His breathing was shallow, labored. "Valentina, don't talk. Save your strength. Help is coming." Around us, the villa erupted in chaos as Lorenzo's men repelled through the windows and engaged the remaining Russians. The firefight was brief, but intense. I heard Dimitri cry out in pain, then fall silent. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence was deafening. "Mrs. Santangelo!" A man in tactical gear approached us cautiously. "I'm Captain Martinez, Lorenzo's head of security. We need to get him to a hospital immediately." "Is it bad?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the amount of blood. "Bad enough, but he's survived worse." Martinez spoke rapidly into his radio, calling for a medical helicopter. "Ma'am, we need to move him now. I'm coming with you." "That's not advisable. You should—" "I'm coming with my husband," I said firmly, using the voice I'd perfected for dealing with difficult students. "And I'm not going to ask again." Martinez looked at Lorenzo, who managed a weak nod. "She comes," Lorenzo whispered. The helicopter ride to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Lorenzo drifted in and out of consciousness, his hand clutching mine with what little strength he had left. "Don't leave me," I whispered, pressing my lips to his knuckles. "I just found you. Don't you dare leave me." "Not going anywhere," he managed. "You shot Dmitri Petrov, my wife, shot the head of the Russian Bratva. Despite everything, I found myself smiling. Is that impressive?" "Terrifying, incredibly sexy, and completely insane." His eyes fluttered closed. Perfect Mafia wife material. The doctors took him away the moment we reached the hospital, leaving me alone in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. I was still wearing my paint-stained clothes from the morning, now decorated with Lorenzo's blood. My hands shook as I tried to process everything that had happened. I had killed a man today. Shot Dmitri Petrov without hesitation when he threatened Lorenzo. The thought should have horrified me, but all I felt was a fierce satisfaction that I'd protected the man I loved. Hours passed before a surgeon finally emerged to find me. "Mrs. Santangelo, your husband is stable. The bullet missed his heart by inches, but we were able to repair the damage. He's going to need extensive recovery time, but he should make a full recovery." The relief was so overwhelming that I nearly collapsed. "Can I see him?" "He's sedated right now, but yes. Room 312. Lorenzo looked smaller in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped and hummed around him. But he was breathing. He was alive. I took the chair beside his bed and settled in to wait. When he finally woke, 12 hours later, the first thing he did was look for me. "Cara mia," he said, his voice hoarse but warm with relief. "You're here. Where else would I be?" I leaned forward to brush a kiss across his forehead. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot by a Russian psychopath." He tried to sit up and winced. "But alive, thanks to you." "Thanks to me?" "Lorenzo, you took a bullet meant for me, and you shot the man who fired it. We're even." I laughed despite myself. "Is this what marriage to you is going to be like? Taking turns saving each other's lives?" Lorenzo's expression grew serious. "Valentina, about what I said in the villa. That you love me? I hope you meant it, because I meant what I said too. I meant every word." He reached up to cup my face with his uninjured hand. "When I married you, I told myself it was just business. A convenient solution to keep you safe. But somewhere between our wedding day and watching you paint on that terrace, you became everything to me." "Just so we're clear," I said, settling more comfortably in my chair. "This marriage definitely means something now." "Everything," he agreed. "It means everything." Outside the hospital window, the Italian sun was setting over the Mediterranean, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Tomorrow, we would have to deal with the aftermath of what had happened at the villa. There would be police reports, rival families to negotiate with, and the complex business of running a criminal empire while recovering from gunshot wounds. But tonight, all that mattered was that we were both alive, both whole, and both finally ready to admit that somewhere between a forced marriage and a mafia war, we had found something neither of us had been looking for. We had found love. 2 months after the attack at the villa, Lorenzo was finally cleared for normal activity. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic throughout his recovery, but seeing him move without wincing for the first time since Italy felt like a miracle. We were back in New York, in the mansion that had become my home, though it felt different now. The walls that had once seemed like a prison now felt like a sanctuary. Every room held memories of our strange courtship. The library where we'd shared our first real conversation. The study where he'd proposed this arrangement that had become so much more. "You're staring," Lorenzo said without looking up from the financial reports spread across his desk. Even recovery hadn't slowed his work ethic. "I'm admiring," I corrected, curling deeper into the leather chair where I'd taken to spending my afternoons while he worked. "There's a difference." "Is there?" He finally looked up, those ice-blue eyes warm with affection. "And what exactly are you admiring, Mrs. Santangelo?" The name still sent a thrill through me. Mrs. Santangelo. Not just a legal shield anymore, but a title I wore with pride. "Everything," I admitted. "The way you've thrown yourself back into work like you weren't nearly killed 2 months ago. The way you still insist on making breakfast every morning, even though we have 3 people who could do it for us. The way you look at me like I'm some kind of miracle instead of the woman who accidentally married into the Mafia." Lorenzo set down his pen and gave me his full attention. "You know what I see when I look at you?" "What?" "The woman who shot Dmitry Petrov without hesitation when he threatened her husband. The woman who refused to hide in a safe room while I fought for our lives. The woman who made me believe in something I thought was just a fairy tale." "What's that?" "Love that's worth dying for." I was about to respond when Maria knocked and entered with her usual efficient grace. "Mr. Santangelo, there's a situation that requires your attention." The warmth in Lorenzo's expression evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold focus of a man who'd spent his life dealing with situations. "What kind of situation?" "Marco has been feeding information to the Kozlov family. Captain Martinez intercepted communications 20 minutes ago." The name hit me like a physical blow. Marco, Lorenzo's childhood friend, his most trusted lieutenant, the man who'd stood at his side through every battle until Italy. The betrayal cut deep, but not as deep as the pain I saw flash across Lorenzo's face before he locked it away. "How long?" Lorenzo's voice was completely controlled, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "At least 6 months, possibly longer. The Kozlovs have been planning a coordinated strike on your shipping operations. Marco provided them with schedules, routes, security protocols. Where is he now?" "Detained in the warehouse on 5th Street, awaiting your orders." Lorenzo stood slowly, his hand moving instinctively to his jacket where I knew he kept his gun. "Gather the senior staff. I want everyone assembled in an hour." "Yes, sir." Maria turned to leave, then hesitated. "Sir, Mrs. Santangelo should know that the Kozlovs have specifically mentioned her in their communications. They see her as a weakness to exploit. Another target on my back. Another family that wanted to use me to hurt Lorenzo. I should have been terrified, but instead, I felt a cold anger settling in my chest. "Thank you, Maria," Lorenzo said. "Double the security detail around the house. No one gets in or out without my personal authorization." After Maria left, silence stretched between us. Lorenzo stared out the window at his perfectly maintained grounds, his jaw clenched with the effort of controlling his emotions. "He was like a brother to me," he said finally. "I know. I trusted him with everything. With you." I rose and moved to stand behind him, wrapping my arms around his waist and pressing my cheek to his back. I could feel the tension radiating through him, the way he was holding himself together through sheer force of will. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now he dies." "And the Kozlovs learn what happens to people who threaten what's mine." The finality in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it felt like a promise of protection, a vow that he would eliminate any threat to our life together. "I want to be there," I said. Lorenzo turned in my arms, his eyes wide with shock. "What?" "When you confront Marco, I want to be there." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous, and besides..." Besides what? I'm too soft? Too innocent? I stepped back, meeting his gaze steadily. Lorenzo, I killed for you. I chose this life, chose you, chose to be part of this world. You can't protect me from it forever. I can try, and I love you for it, but Marco betrayed both of us. He put me in danger, put our marriage at risk. I have as much right to face him as you do. Lorenzo studied my face for a long moment, and I could see the internal struggle playing out in his eyes. The man who'd fallen in love with me wanted to keep me safe, sheltered from the darker realities of his business. But the Mafia boss recognized the strength in my argument, understood that I was no longer the frightened teacher he'd rescued from a school bathroom. If you come with me, he said finally, you follow my lead exactly. No improvisation, no heroics. Understood. Understood. And Valentina? His hands framed my face, thumbs brushing across my cheekbones. After tonight, there's no going back. Once you cross this line, you'll be as deep in this world as I am. I thought about the woman I'd been just months ago. Alone, struggling, invisible to everyone around her. Then I thought about the woman I was now. Loved, protected, strong enough to pull a trigger when someone threatened what mattered to me. I'm already as deep as you are, I said. I have been since the moment I said I do. The warehouse on 5th Street looked exactly like what it was. A place where people disappeared. Lorenzo's men had cleared the area, creating a buffer zone of several blocks around the building. When our car pulled up, I could see armed figures positioned on nearby rooftops, in doorways, behind parked vehicles. This wasn't just about confronting a traitor. This was about sending a message. Last chance to stay in the car, Lorenzo said, as we sat in the back seat, watching his men secure the perimeter. Not happening. He nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. Remember what I taught you. Eyes up, shoulders back. Never let them see weakness. You're not Valentina Costa, the art teacher, anymore. You're Valentina Santangelo, my wife, and that makes you one of the most dangerous women in this city. We entered the warehouse together, and I felt every eye in the room track our movement. Lorenzo's men, hardened criminals who'd seen every kind of violence imaginable, looked at me with a mixture of respect and wariness. Word of what had happened in Italy had spread. They knew their boss's wife was not to be underestimated. Marco was bound to a chair in the center of the vast space, his face bloodied from what I assumed had been a very one-sided conversation with Martinez's men. When he saw us approaching, his eyes went first to Lorenzo, then to me, and I saw the moment he realized what my presence meant. Lorenzo, he said, his voice hoarse. I can explain. Can you? Lorenzo's voice was conversational, almost friendly, which somehow made it more terrifying. Can you explain how you betrayed the man who treated you like family? Can you explain how you sold information that put my wife in danger? They had my sister. The Kozlovs, they took Elena and said they'd kill her if I didn't. You came to me for help with Elena's gambling debt 6 months ago, Lorenzo interrupted. I paid them off personally. $200,000, no questions asked, because you were family. Marco's face crumpled. They took her again, said the debt had interest, penalties. They wanted information or they'd... So you decided to risk my life instead of hers. I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I could control it, feed them enough to keep Elena safe, but not enough to really hurt you. Lorenzo pulled out his gun, checking the chamber with practiced ease. The Kozlovs planned to hit 3 of my shipments simultaneously. If they'd succeeded, it would have cost me millions and weakened my position enough for a hostile takeover. Was Elena's life worth destroying everything I've built? She's my sister, and Valentina is my wife. Lorenzo's control finally cracked, his voice echoing through the warehouse. You put her in the crosshairs of the Russian Bratva because you were too proud to ask for help. I stepped forward, feeling every gun in the room track my movement. Where is Elena now, Marco? His eyes met mine, and I saw desperation there, and grief, and the terrible knowledge of what was about to happen to him. Safe, he whispered. Martinez's team extracted her 3 hours ago. She doesn't know about any of this. Good, I said simply. Then she'll mourn you as a brother, not as a traitor. Marco's eyes widened with shock. He'd expected mercy from me, perhaps. Expected the art teacher to plead for his life, to soften Lorenzo's resolve. Instead, he found something harder, colder. He found a woman who'd learned that sometimes love meant being willing to destroy anyone who threatened it. "Valentina, please," he began. "You betrayed my husband," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent warehouse. "You put our marriage, our life, our future at risk because you thought Lorenzo would forgive you anything. But there are some lines you don't cross, Marco. Some betrayals that can't be forgiven." Lorenzo looked at me with something that might have been pride, then turned his attention back to Marco. "Any last words?" "Tell Elena I'm sorry. Tell her I love her. I will." The gunshot was deafeningly loud in the enclosed space, echoing off concrete walls and steel beams. Marco slumped forward, and just like that, a chapter of Lorenzo's life was closed forever. "Clean this up," Lorenzo commanded, holstering his weapon. "And send flowers to Elena. Anonymous but expensive. She's lost enough." As we walked back to the car, I felt the weight of what had just happened settling over me. I'd watched my husband execute a man who'd been like a brother to him, and I'd felt no pity, no regret, only satisfaction that the threat had been eliminated. "How do you feel?" Lorenzo asked as we settled into the back seat. "Like myself," I said, and realized it was true. Like exactly who I was meant to be. Lorenzo pulled me closer, his lips brushing against my temple. "Welcome to the family business, Mrs. Santangelo." Outside the warehouse, his men were already implementing the plan to eliminate the Kozlov threat permanently. By morning, the Russian family would be nothing more than a memory. Another cautionary tale about the price of threatening Lorenzo Santangelo's wife. I closed my eyes and rested my head on Lorenzo's shoulder, feeling completely at peace for the first time since our wedding day. This was my life now. Dangerous, violent, unforgiving to enemies, but fiercely protective of family. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. 2 years later, I stood in our renovated library, watching Lorenzo pace while speaking rapid Italian into his phone. The conversation was heated, something about shipping routes and territory disputes, but his voice carried the absolute authority of a man who'd consolidated his power completely. The room looked different now. Where once it had felt like a museum, now it felt like home. My paintings hung on the walls alongside the priceless art Lorenzo had inherited, and the massive desk near the window held both his business files and my art supplies. We'd blended our two worlds into something uniquely ours. "Si, capisco," Lorenzo said into the phone, his free hand running through his hair in a gesture I'd learned meant he was frustrated but in control. "Handle it, and make sure they understand this is their only warning." He ended the call and turned to me, his expression immediately softening when our eyes met. 2 years of marriage had taught me to read every micro-expression on his face, and right now I could see tension around his eyes that meant someone had crossed a line. "Problems?" I asked, setting down my paintbrush and giving him my full attention. "Nothing I can't handle. The Torino family thinks they can expand into our territory while I'm distracted." He moved to stand behind my easel, studying the seascape I'd been working on. "They're wrong. Distracted by what?" Lorenzo's hand settled on my shoulders, and I leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him. "By my beautiful wife and the news we received this morning." I smiled, my hand moving instinctively to my still flat stomach where our child was growing. We'd found out 3 days ago, and Lorenzo had been alternating between fierce protectiveness and barely contained joy ever since. "You're not distracted," I said. "You're motivated. There's a difference." "Is there?" His lips brushed against my temple. "Because I find myself thinking more about nursery colors than shipping manifests lately. The nursery can wait. Your business can't." Lorenzo spun me around in his arms, his ice blue eyes intense with emotion. "Do you know what you've given me, Valentina?" "What?" "A reason to build something that lasts. Before you, I was just maintaining what my father left me. Now I'm creating a legacy for our children. Children. Plural." The thought sent a thrill through me. 2 years ago, I'd been a lonely art teacher with no family and a mountain of debt. Now I was Lorenzo Santangelo's wife, pregnant with his child, and helping him run an empire that spanned 3 states. "Speaking of legacy," I said, reaching for the folder on my desk, "I have some ideas about the community center project. Lorenzo's expression shifted to one of amused indulgence. The community center had been my idea, a way to give back to the neighborhoods where his businesses operated, providing art classes and after-school programs for kids who needed somewhere safe to go. It was completely legal, completely legitimate, and completely my domain. "Tell me," he said, settling into the chair across from my easel. "I want to expand it. Not just one center, but 5 across the city. Art programs, music lessons, tutoring, sports leagues. Everything these kids need to stay off the streets and out of trouble. And the budget? $2 million annually. I know it sounds like a lot, but done." I blinked. "Just like that? Karamia, if my wife wants to save the city's children through finger painting and violin lessons, she'll have whatever budget she needs." His smile was soft with affection. "Besides, it's good for business. Communities that thrive are communities where we can operate without interference." This was how Lorenzo worked. Every decision served multiple purposes. The community centers would help disadvantaged kids, but they'd also create goodwill in neighborhoods where his operations were based. It was brilliant, calculating, and completely in character. "There's something else," I said. "I want to hire some of the older kids as assistants, pay them legitimate wages for legitimate work, give them alternatives to working for families like mine," Lorenzo finished. "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "You're trying to put me out of business, Mrs. Santangelo. I'm trying to make sure our child grows up in a world where they have choices," I replied. "Real choices, not just the illusion of them." Lorenzo stood and moved to the window, looking out at the grounds where his men patrolled with their usual vigilance. "Do you know what my father told me before he died?" "What?" "That power isn't about how many people fear you. It's about how many people need you. The families that last are the ones that become indispensable to their communities." I joined him at the window, slipping my hand into his. "So the community centers make us indispensable in a different way. Instead of controlling through fear, we control through dependence on our generosity." His thumb stroked across my knuckles. "You're more devious than I gave you credit for, Karamia. I learned from the best." A soft knock interrupted us. Maria entered with her usual efficiency, but I caught the satisfied look on her face. "The Torino situation has been resolved," she announced. "Mr. Martinez's team was very persuasive." "Casualties?" Lorenzo asked. "None on our side. The Torinos have agreed to withdraw from the disputed territories and pay restitution for their presumption." "Good. And the Benedetti wedding this weekend?" "All arrangements confirmed. The family is honored by your attendance." I listened to this exchange with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to hear the real meaning behind euphemisms. The Torino situation had likely involved significant violence, though probably not death. Lorenzo preferred to avoid unnecessary killing since our honeymoon. The Benedetti wedding was a business meeting disguised as a social event, a chance for Lorenzo to solidify alliances and display his power. "Will you need me there?" I asked after Maria left. "Always. You're my secret weapon at these things." It was true. Over the past 2 years, I'd discovered I had a talent for reading people, for knowing exactly what to say to put wives at ease while their husbands discussed business with Lorenzo. The other family's women trusted me because I'd been an outsider once, and they respected me because I'd proven I could be as ruthless as any of them when necessary. "What should I wear?" I asked. "Something that shows you're pregnant. I want everyone to see that the Santangelo line is secured." The clinical way he said it might have hurt once. Now I understood it was Lorenzo's way of expressing pride and protectiveness. In his world, everything was strategic, but that didn't make his emotions any less real. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it absently. Then I looked again, my blood running cold. Lorenzo. Something in my voice made him turn immediately, his entire body going tense with readiness. "What is it?" I held up my phone, showing him the message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the pregnancy, Mrs. Santangelo. It would be a shame if something happened to the little one." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Lorenzo's face went completely still, his eyes becoming chips of Arctic ice. "Maria!" he called, his voice carrying enough authority to summon half his security team. She appeared instantly. "Yes, sir? Code Black. Lock down the estate. No one in or out without my personal authorization. Contact Martinez. I want every phone traced, every security system checked, every potential threat eliminated. Right away, sir. After Maria rushed out, Lorenzo turned to me, his hands framing my face with infinite gentleness despite the fury burning in his eyes. Listen to me very carefully, he said. Nothing is going to happen to you or our child. Do you understand? Nothing. Who would dare threaten us directly? Someone with a death wish. His voice was deadly calm. But it doesn't matter who. By the end of the week, there'll be nothing more than a memory. I should have been terrified. Someone had just threatened my unborn child, invaded the sanctuary of our home with their malice. But looking into Lorenzo's eyes, I felt only a cold satisfaction that whoever had made this mistake would soon learn the price of threatening the Santangelo family. What do you need me to do? I asked. Lorenzo's expression shifted, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth despite the circumstances. I need you to be exactly who you are, the most dangerous woman in New York, disguised as an art teacher. I'm not disguised as anything anymore, I said firmly. I am Valentina Santangelo, your wife, the mother of your children, and anyone who threatens our family will learn why that's the most dangerous thing they could possibly do. Lorenzo kissed me then, hard and possessive, and full of the love that had transformed us both from what we were into what we were meant to be together. Outside, his men were already implementing security protocols that would turn our home into an impenetrable fortress. Phone calls were being made to allies and informants throughout the city. By morning, every criminal organization in New York would know that someone had declared war on the Santangelo family. It would be a very short war. As Lorenzo held me against his chest, our child safe between us, I thought about how much had changed since that night in the school bathroom. I'd gone from being a woman with nothing to lose to being someone with everything to protect. And I would protect it all, with the same ruthless determination that had made Lorenzo the most feared man in the city. This marriage had stopped being business long ago. Now it was something far more powerful. It was love backed by absolute power, and there was nothing in the world more dangerous than that.